Okay, my friends, we are on episode 22 of Beezy's Stream of Consciousness podcast, and I am your humble host, Beezy, of whom many songs and plays have been written over the years. Coming to you from Starbase One studio through the technical expertise of Audacity, the distributive prowess of Podbean, and the musical interludes by Soundroll. So, had a lot I wanted to do on the show today, but things came up, and it was found out that the story time portion of our program was going to run longer than I expected. So I'm going to get right into that, and we're not going to do the top 10 today. Maybe tomorrow, maybe Sunday. We will do it this weekend, but we're not going to do it tonight. So we're going to get right into Cloaks and Barbs, so stick around. Okay, here we go with Chapter 12 of Cloaks and Barbs. If you have not been keeping up and you would like to, please refer back to previous podcast episodes. They've been doing every chapter in sequence, so just go back and this is number 22. We're on this is chapter 12, so you go all the way back to probably episode 9 or 10, and you can start getting caught up. So maybe a couple episodes before that, because we did have a prologue and an introduction and so forth. So, but let's get started on chapter 12 of Cloaks and Barbs tonight. All right, chapter 12, U-534. The current is drawing us out into the middle of the channel, Kuiper. Quartermaster's mate Gunther Haas said softly. He pointed to a place on the chart labeled Der Boden der Kliffen, Three Cliffs Bay, and dragged his finger towards the center of the Bristol Channel. We were here when we went silent. Now, accounting for current and drift, we should be here, nearly one full kilometer to seaward. The current here is quite strong. Von Kuiper's brow creased, and he shook his head back and forth. I thought we came in at low tide, he protested. How can we be drifting out to seaward now? Did you not tell me when we set course for this place that morning would bring high tide? Indeed, I did, sir, and so it has. We were talking about two different things here. The tide is raising and lowering of the water level caused by our moon's gravity on the seas. It has nothing to do with the current, which is the directional flow of ocean water at a given depth. Just below the surface here is a rather robust current that flows in from the Celtic Sea. According to my charts, it loops around from the far end of the channel and comes out again. It is this current that has us moving slowly, to be sure, but nevertheless moving seaward. You say it is below the surface, Von Kuiper asked, mildly miffed that he was being lectured by a petty officer, and even more miffed that he had forgotten the difference between tide and current. He had been on duty too long without sleep. What of the Americans? Won't it push him right along with us? 9, Haas reported with a slight grin. The current diminishes at about 10 meters from the surface and disappears altogether at 8. The American boat will feel its drag, of course, but it will be nothing compared to what we are feeling. My instruments show that we are moving out at nearly 2 knots. Excuse me. 2 knots without making noise, Von Kuiper muttered, not trying to let excitement creep into his voice. He had been puzzling over how to extricate his boat from the little bay for over an hour, and he had been growing progressively more despondent with each passing minute. Now he was moving at essentially half of U-534's rated underwater speed and without the corresponding noise of propellers and motors. Interesting. This current of yours, how far out will it take us? As the water deepens, it will lose some of its energy, Haas said. I should think that... Now, just a moment. It must be an incredible current to move nearly 1,200 deadweight tons at 2 knots, Von Kuiper interrupted suddenly. This sounds too good to be true, Haas. Are you sure of this? Show me your logs. Haas produced his dead reckoning trace as well as his nautical chart. Both were liberally scrawled with notations of the U-boat's movements since they had entered the channel. Von Kuiper studied them for several silent minutes as he mentally compared them with his own memories of their maneuvering. While his charts were being scrutinized, Haas could hear the drip of condensation that had collected on the surfaces of every pipe-fitting gauge and dial all over the hot, humid control room. The stale air reeked of diesel fuel and sweat. He saw another sailor enter the compartment through the aft hatch carrying a container of quicklime and soda to help reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. The chemicals gave the atmosphere in the control room a sharp, rather acrid smell that vaguely reminded him of antiseptics. At last, von Kuiper grunted and handed both charts back to his navigator. "They appear to be in order," he said simply. He rubbed the stubble on his cheeks pensively as he studied the title chart before him. "Assuming that you are correct," he said, "where would this current put the Americans right now?" Haas pointed to a spot closer to shore. "Here, sir. They have drifted 100 meters, perhaps, during the same time that we have drifted nearly 10 times that distance. If we do correct for the drift, I would say that in another 30 minutes' time we will be here, where the channel begins to deepen. The current will diminish at that point, and our drift will decrease until we are nearly still." "So what you were telling me is that we have drifted right past the American, and that we will be in deeper water in half an hour's time?" "That is correct, Herr Kuiper. You might verify this with the sonarmen, but when we get back into deeper water, it will have greater salinity than this brackish stuff here at the bay. As you know, salinity affects sound propagation. Any moderate sounds we make will be reflected away from the surface. We may be able to start our engines and slip out of these waters without the Americans or anyone else hearing us. That is the theory, of course." Von Kuiper's eyebrows went up. "Yeah, I will check with sonar on that one, Haas. If you are correct on all of this, and if we make it back to port, I will see to it that you make chief." Haas started to smile, but he froze when he saw a figure entering the control compartment through the forward hatch. It was Hipper, and he was wearing a blood-stained surgical gown and gloves. He looked sweaty, haggard, and exhausted. Von Kuiper rushed over to him. "The Captain," he said anxiously. "How is he?" Hipper stripped off his gloves and began untying his surgical gown. "He will live," he said softly as he leaned tiredly against the bulkhead. His face was bathed in perspiration and his uniform tunic was soaked through. His shoulder is wrecked and there is nerve damage from the sharpshooter's bullet. It hit his right scapula nearly dead center and shattered it in several pieces, one of which nicked the subscapular artery, the one that supplies the arm with most of its blood. "That is why there was so much of the stuff up in the conning tower," Von Kuiper said with a nod. He shuddered as he thought of all the blood still staining the tiny compartment above his head. He made a mental note to have someone swab it up. "Yeah, a few minutes more and the man would have bled to death." He sighed and shook his eyes. "I'm no surgeon, mind you, and the work was not pretty, but I was able to repair the damage to the blood vessel so we can now replace what he has lost. I'm giving a whole unit of blood right now, and I'll probably give him another as soon as he is able to take it." "What of the arm? Will he be able to use it when he recovers?" Hipper shook his head and ran his hands through his grimy hair. "I do not know. I had to piece the shoulder blade back together like a kinder's jigsaw puzzle. I saw the dorsal scapular nerve." He placed his hand on Von Kuiper's neck to show him the location. "Suffered some damage, but I know little of neurology. I did not touch it because I would have done more harm than good. He will need a specialist back home. I know of an Oberst in the Wehrmacht who is reputed to be the best neurologist in all of Europe. His name is Meyer, and it is said he has treated the Fuhrer. Perhaps he can mend the Capitan in those areas where he is experten. I am merely an amateur drawing pay." He smiled wanly at his own joke and looked around the control room. "And what is our situation here? I was told that I could not run my ventilators, which made for very uncomfortable surgery. As you can see, I am a stinking, sweaty mess. I would kill for a smoke, too, but I see that the smoking lamp is out. Are the Americans still about?" "They are," Von Kuiper said with a knowing smile, "but not as close as they were. God willing, we will be able to resume normal operations within the hour." "Das ist gut," Hipper said. "Yeah, it is. Now, this is important, Hipper. When will I be able to speak with the Capitan?" "Not for a while yet," Hipper said, shaking his head from side to side emphatically. "He has taken great hurt and requires rest, lots of it. And when he does awaken, he should not be overburdened with shipboard worries. You are very experienced. The boat will be in good hands while he recovers. I should like to see him rest all the way back home if possible. He is quite headstrong, our Capitan, and he will probably not want to listen to his friendly shipboard corpsman." "We shall see about that," Von Kuiper said, giving the corpsman a friendly slap on the cheek. "You've done well, Hipper. Go forward and have some tea. and have some stewards send back here for some for the lads. I would prefer a Pilsner, sir, Hipper said with a grin. We all would, Hipper. God knows I could use one right now. USS Barb. You would think this place would be crawling with Brits by now, Dunaway observed quietly while he sipped from yet another mug of coffee. It was his fourth cup in the last hour and a half, and the combination of fatigue and caffeine was giving him the shakes. As they like to say, this is their manner. All of their HDMLs are in the Irish Sea right now, Matthews said, puffing on a cigar as he leaned against the Pelorus just aft of the hatch leading down in the conning tower. They don't carry sonar or torpedoes, so they wouldn't be much help to us. They're like little PT boats minus the fish. A couple of old R boats are supposed to be headed this way, but the Brit commanders got to be worried about having them blunder into one of our kill zones, so I can't imagine. I imagine they're taking their sweet time. He looked at the eastern sky. It was already turning from a dark, dark blue of early morning to a more light of pre-dawn. The stars were already taking flight, and the moon was about to set. Sunrise is about an hour away. Bogue is supposed to be sending a flight of Avengers this way with sonobuoys if we need them. Those are pretty nifty gizmos, Dunaway said as he drained his mug. Yep. The latest thing in anti-submarine warfare, a miniature sonar set carried by aircraft and dropped wherever it's needed. Both active and passive modes, too, all automatically radioed back to the aircraft. I sure hope the other side doesn't pick up on this idea before this thing is over, or else our job will get a hell of a lot harder. I don't know about you, Skipper, but I think our job is plenty hard enough as it is. He suddenly frowned as he looked towards Tor Bay. His brow furrowed as he appeared to be puzzling over something. He took a step back to the Pelorus and took a quick compass reading as well as a shore sighting through its veins. Is it just me, Skipper, or have we drifted a bit to seaward? Yeah, there's a little current in here that we didn't know about. I guess we've moved about 80 yards or so since we stopped the engines. Dunaway mulled that over for a while, rubbing his temples in slow circles. What's on your mind, Robert? I'm not sure, sir. Maybe I'm missing something here. We've been on the go since before dawn yesterday, Matthews allowed. He took a long puff on a cigar and exhaled a wisp of blue smoke. We're all beat, that's for sure. Even with all the coffee I've been drinking, I could sleep for a week if given the chance. What do you think we're missing? This current. If it's moving us out like this, what do you suppose it's doing to the Kraut boat? He's not using his screws, so he's just sitting there, right? His eyes went wide suddenly. He put his hand to his forehead. Damn, Skipper. What if this current has carried him further out? You know, any currents in here will increase with depth. We're on the surface, and he's at periscope depth at least. He could have just slid right under our nose without us ever knowing it. The light apparently came on in Matthew's head as well. His expression hardened and his hands tightened on the shell plating of the deck until his knuckles were white. He could be long gone, he said grimly and quietly. How the hell could I have missed that? I recommend an active search, sir, Dunaway said, right now. Matthew's lips were drawn into tight, angry lines, and he tossed a cigar over the side. Make it so, he growled. U-534. Von Kuiper had just taken a scalding gulp of tea when he heard a sound he'd been dreading for the last 2 hours, a high-pitched ping that reverberated against the metal hull of his boat. American active sonar, hissed the sonarman. Localize it, Von Kuiper ordered. Feed the data to the fire control team. He turned to his most senior Chief Petty Officer, Boatswain's Mate Wilhelm Becker, who stood by at the fire control station. Make ready the stern tube, Becker, he said quickly. I want to be ready to get off a snapshot if it becomes necessary. The American is approximately 1 kilometer away on bearing 180 relative, sonar reported. It was not a strong signal, though. He must have his transducer pointed away from us, sir. A half-smile formed on Von Kuiper's face. He thinks we are still unsure of him, he said with a chuckle. He will soon learn the error of his ways. I hear his diesels now, sir, the sonarman said. He is engaging his propellers. That will be a mistake, my friend, Von Kuiper said quietly as he looked up at the overhead. You are tired. We are tired. You are getting over-eager. Starting your engines will only mask our departure and deafen your own sonar. He turned to Quartermaster Haas, who has been over the chart table. Set the best course out of here, Haas, and make it quick. The American will soon learn of his mistake, and I want to be as far away as possible when he corrects it. Haas's response was immediate, as he had been plotting a rough course out of the channel for the last 15 minutes. Recommend course 225 true, sir, he said as he danced his dividers over the chart and checked his figures with a circular slide rule. That will take us out of the Bristol Channel and into the Celtic Sea proper. Von Kuiper nodded. Very well. Helm, set new course of 225 true. Engage motors and make revolutions for 2 knots. Quietly, gentlemen, quietly. What is the depth under the keel? 110 meters and increasing, sir, replied the diving officer. We are nearing the middle channel of these waters. Excellent. Make your depth 50 meters slowly now, using only the planes. Do not vent the diving tanks until ordered. Let us stay as silent as we can. Aye, sir. They heard the whirring of electric drive motors being engaged aft in the maneuvering room, and the deck tilted slightly forward as they changed depth. Von Kuiper grimaced with every pop of the hull as the boat slowly went deeper, and he noticed with alarm that the American sonar pings were growing louder. The American is turning now, the sonarman reported while he listened to his headphones with his eyes tightly shut in concentration. He is still pinging, however, and the pings are approaching detection values. Sir, my depth is 50 meters, the diving officer said, maintaining depth with planes only for the moment. But be advised that I will have to vent soon to keep her here. She's fighting me. Understood, Von Kuiper replied. What is the American speed? Blade count indicates turns for 10 knots, sonar said. Von Kuiper did some quick mental arithmetic and tugged nervously at his ear. Becker, he said, do you have a firing solution on the American? Solution is set, Becker answered. Stern tube ready to fire. The American is directly astern, sonar put in, bearing 180 relative. Becker, set gyro angle for 0, depth 5 meters and speed 40 knots, Von Kuiper said, rubbing his hands together anxiously. Becker fed the information into the fire control panel and nodded. Aft, in the stern torpedo room, young sailors wearing only sweat-stained skivvies made the appropriate adjustments to the torpedoes sitting in the tube. Presently, a white light illuminated on Becker's panel, indicating they had only to flood and open the outer door before firing. Torpedo is ready with new settings and standing by, sir, he said. Runtime will be 11 seconds. Depth under the keel? 160 meters and still falling away, sir, said the diving officer. I'm having difficulty maintaining this depth without blowing ballast. Patience, Von Kuiper said softly, as much to himself as to his diving officer. He was sweating profusely now, and it was stinging his eyes. He blinked them clear. Patience. Sir, if the American doesn't have us now, he will any minute, sonar warned. Solution? Von Kuiper asked again. Set. Flood tube and open outer door. Becker flipped 2 toggle switches and the torpedoman aft manually vented the tube to the sea and cranked a wheel that opened the outer door. Tube ready, sir, Becker said as soon as the appropriate status lights showed white on his board. Von Kuiper wiped his sweaty palms on his trousers and looked squarely at his boatswain. Match bearings and fire, he said. USS Barb. Torpedo in the water, dead ahead, Norris yelled shrilly, so much so that Matthews and Dunaway could hear him all the way up on the bridge. It's real close, sir. All ahead flank, Matthews ordered. Right full rudder. Barb's 4 diesels, which had been purring along at less than half their rated power, came alive with a roar, and the water after the boat churned into white foam as her twin screws spun up to full speed. Her rudder was pushed against its stops as well, and the boat leaned to her port side while she made a frantic starboard turn. Matthews, Dunaway, and the rest of the bridge crew held on to whatever they could as they tried to keep their footing. Do you see it? Matthews called over his shoulder to the lookouts. Unfortunately, a high cloud picked that particular moment to interpose itself between the moon and the Bristol Channel, darkening the surface of the water and foiling the lookouts' attempt to see the torpedo's bubble wake. For several uncomfortable seconds, they all strained to see any sign of the inbound weapon. I see it, the portside look finally called. Fish in the water, broadside on the port beam. Matthews could see it too, and he could see that it was going to hit. Barb was turning fast, but not fast enough. He judged that Barb's stern wouldn't clear the torpedo's path, and that it would hit somewhere in the vicinity of the after torpedo room. All hands brace for impact, he yelled. Dunaway watched with morbid fascination as the German fish bored in, making a path for the boat's stern. Miss, you bastard, he said between clenched teeth. When it became apparent it would miss, he grabbed Matthews and pulled him down behind the bridge shell plating. He hoped that the resulting explosion wouldn't tear the lookouts apart as they bravely stood exposed on the periscope shears. He closed his eyes and waited for the inevitable boom. Clonk. U-534. I heard an impact, sir, the sonarman reported sheepishly, but I didn't hear an explosion. Von Kuiper's eyes went wide and he whirled around to face Becker. What the devil happened? He thundered at his boatswain. Becker, his face ashen, shrugged helplessly. A dud, sir, he explained weakly. Perhaps the shelling earlier. Take us deep, Von Kuiper ordered angrily. Make your depth 150 meters, right 10 degrees rudder, all ahead 2/3. He slammed his fist on the chart table, scattering Haas's charts and logs and making the navigator jump. Verdammt, he raged. We had him in our hands. The control room was filled with the sounds of air rushing out of the ballast tanks and the hull popping as the boat went deeper. The deck tilted a bit, and after a minute or two righted itself as the diving officer leveled off the descent. Sir, he reported, my depth is now 150 meters. Very well, Von Kuiper replied as he struggled to regain his composure. You are the commanding officer for now, he silently reproached himself. Start acting like one. Helm, steer 225. Let's get back on course, make turns for 2 knots, maintain quiet boat routine. Sonar, what is the American doing now? Nothing, sir. He is still on the surface. His engines are idling, but his propellers have stopped. Von Kuiper's eyebrows went up. He's not pursuing us, eh? He said quietly. I cannot imagine why. Still, das ist gut. If he's tired of the chase, then so be it. Haas, he said with a note of triumph in his voice, set a course for home. Let's get the devil out of these British waters. USS Barb. Which of us is living right, Skipper? Dunaway asked as he examined the damage to Barb's portside stern hull plating. He was standing with his captain, Lieutenant Gray, and Chief O'Brien on the extreme aft end of Barb's deck, shining flashlights over the stern of the boat. Matthews had disengaged the screws on the chance that there could be damage to Barb's delicate stern or her propeller seals. It turned out that the damage seemed to be no more than a large dent in the middle of the hull plate just above the boat's port side propeller bracket. As for the torpedo, it apparently shattered upon hitting Barb's hull, and the pieces sank harmlessly. Well, it must be you, Robert, replied Matthews, because all I can think about is putting my hands around that kraut skipper's neck and wringing it good. That's got to be a sin in somebody's boat. No leaks in the aft torpedo room, sir, Gray reported. The maneuvering room is dry, too, so the seals are okay. Of course, something might give when we dive. I don't think so, Mr. Gray, O'Brien said. That's just a little old whiskey dent there, smack dab in the middle of a plate. None of the rivets has popped. I think she'll hold just fine. I agree, Dunaway concurred. Now, I'm not so sure about that torpedo, though. It must have been one of those old surplus fish that hit us square on like that and not blow. The rest of the men caught the joke and laughed. The relieved laugh of men who, upon facing death, learn that they have been reprieved and will live to fight another day. News of the German dud torpedo had naturally spread throughout the crew, and the men of Barb were pleased to know that theirs wasn't the only navy in the world to be sent into battle with defective weapons. Okay, so it looks like we're shipshape, Matthews pronounced. So we're back in the hunt, sir? Dunaway asked. The captain looked east at the lightning sky for several moments before answering. No, Mr. Dunaway, he said quietly and thoughtfully. Our friend is out in deep water by now, which makes him somebody else's problem. Bogue's Avengers will be here shortly. We'll leave the crowd to them and our other boats. We need to get back to our kill zone, and our men need to eat and rest. Let's head back to our patrol area. Chief, get below and have somebody watch the bulkheads in the aft torpedo room and the shaft seals and maneuvering, just to be sure. Mr. Gray, let's get the old girl back underway. O'Brien and Gray turned and went forward towards the conning tower, but Dunaway lingered with his captain, waiting for the others to be out of earshot. So, he said casually, as he could without sounding accusatory, we're letting him go, sir? Matthews sighed, knowing that this was coming. I know what you're thinking, he said, and you're right. We've chased this guy from Dover to Wales, and the men deserve to see that he gets his just desserts. Well, right or wrong, fair or unfair, it doesn't work that way. I violated orders to chase him this far, and we've been away from our assigned area for nearly a day. Sinclair and the Brit Defense Ministry are counting on us to be there in our proper spot. Oh, sure. I suppose I could radio the old man and get permission to continue the hunt. And if it was just us out here, he'd probably let us do it. But we're not alone, and I know what Jones will say. So do you. God knows how much I'd like to send that crowd to the bottom. But we've got boats all over the place, not to mention Bogue and Block Island further out. Somebody will get this guy, and who knows, once we get back on station, it just might be us. If Jerry survives the gauntlet, he'll have to come through our area, assuming he doesn't take the long way home. I hear you, Skipper Dunaway said, but I'd sure like to paint his swastika on our conning tower. I know the men would. Matthews clapped him on the shoulder, and they started walking back up the deck. Beneath their feet, Barb's diesels rumbled, and dark smoke billowed out of the exhaust. The boat shook slightly and began gliding forward. Off to starboard, the Welsh coastline with its limestone cliffs and beech trees started to recede as they steamed into deeper water. Ahead, they could see the mouth of the Bristol Channel and the Celtic Sea beyond. In the east, the first rays of dawn were creeping over the horizon, and the sky was lightening. Nobody wants that more than I do, he said. Come on, let me buy you some breakfast. Santiago 4. It was well past dawn, and a model tan and green British Army 6x6 troop carrier sat in front of the hut, waiting to take the French and British operators to Swansea for reassignment. A black standard sedan bearing the RAF roundel on its doors sat idling behind the truck. A white carry-all ambulance with red crosses painted conspicuously on its sides stood by as well. Soldiers wearing the black berets of the King's Regiment Liverpool were helping the British and French women load their haversacks and other paraphernalia into the canvas-covered bed of the truck, while Hawthorne and Barbara watched from the front garden. White liveried corpsmen were bearing sheet-covered litters out of the front door of the hut and loading them onto the ambulance. The surviving American operators, Thelma and Hattie, sat off to one side with their belongings piled nearby, while their counterparts came up in ones and twos to exchange hugs, tears, and farewells. The mood was decidedly somber. Presently, another RAF officer emerged from the hut, followed by two enlisted airmen, both bearing heavy boxes of ammunition. Right, lads, he said. Just put those in my motor, if you please. He crossed the garden and addressed Hawthorne. Ah, Nigel, he said. Those two are the last of your code machines, so there's nothing else classified in the operations center now. The Army chaps will see to security matters here now, and the MI5 mob will be along shortly. Group Captain Sir Lionel Mallory, RAF KCB, was the short, friendly, and energetic commanding officer of Santiago 3. His thick hair had gone permanently gray years before, but his razor-thin mustache was still jet black, and was often turned up in a smile, revealing a mouthful of perfect white teeth. On the left chest of his olive uniform tunic was the crimson ribbon of the Most Honorable Military Order of the Bath, the only decoration he wore informally, but one that showed that he was a knight commander of the order, an honor bestowed on him for conspicuous gallantry in the air during the Blitz. Hawthorne considered him more than merely a colleague. The two had flown together before the war in various postings, and Mallory was the closest thing Hawthorne had to a best friend. So that's it, then, Hawthorne said flatly. This was a damn good post, Lionel. He looked at Barbara. Damn fine operators, too. Your lot had the best marks of anyone in the group, Mallory allowed. It's a pity to break it up, but I'm pleased indeed that you, at least, will be joining me, albeit temporarily. It will be good to have a brain like yours to pick now and again, while our Lord Remington can decide where best to utilize you. That made the normally proud Hawthorne smile and look away embarrassed. And you, lass, he said to Barbara. I should be very happy to have you too, but apparently that isn't meant to be. You and your lot will enjoy London, I think. I'm looking forward to it, Group Captain, Barbara replied. I know my girls can use the time off. They've earned it, Hawthorne said quietly. He saw that the British and French operators were now climbing into the back of the truck, while the others got as comfortable as the wooden benches along each side of the bed would allow. Carstairs and Desjardins turned and caught Hawthorne's eyes. Excuse me, he said, and left Barbara and Mallory alone to give his farewells to the women. He's quite disappointed that he won't be joining them, Mallory observed. Excuse me, sir? Barbara asked. Nigel, your group captain there, wanted so very much to be joining them at Bletchley Park with Lord Seymour, Mallory said softly. What happens at Station X is vitally important, Lieutenant, vitally important. But what happens here at these listening posts represents the tip of the spear, as it were. You see, we are the first to hear the raw signals and see the raw data. Everyone further up the chain, important though they may be to the overall operation, merely gets what we send them. We are the gatherers of intelligence, and they are the analysis. And for my part, I prefer to be the gatherer. He nodded in Hawthorne's direction. In his heart of hearts, my mate Nigel there is a gatherer too. I hope I get to keep him for a while, once he's finished with that MI5 debrief, of course. He's a good man, Barbara acknowledged, and a fine officer. And a damned fine, good friend, Lieutenant. You were indeed fortunate to have worked with him here. They saw that Hawthorne had finished his goodbyes and that the driver had fired up the diesel engine. It came to life with a loud clatter and large puff of black smoke, and Hawthorne had to stumble back towards the gate, coughing and smiling. The women giggled and waved to him, and presently the truck began moving slowly down the road towards Swansea. Barbara raised her hand in farewell and saw that Carstairs and Desjardins were doing the same. I'm going to miss those girls, she said softly. As the truck rounded the bend in the road and passed out of sight, she sniffed and turned her attention to the ambulance. The corpsman had loaded the last of the bodies on board, and now they were closing the big double doors. She watched as Hawthorne spoke to them briefly. Soon thereafter, they climbed into the vehicle, and it slowly began rolling down the road. In moments, it too was gone. She observed him as he stood rooted in the middle of the roadway like a parent whose children had left for school, silently watching the vehicles vanish into the distance. Thelma and Hattie, moved by pity, joined him on the road and put their arms around him and tried to comfort him. Look at the poor bloke, Mallory said sadly. Those girls were like his very own, you know. Yes, sir, being one of them, I know. A corporal came out of the hut and called to Mallory, who turned and disappeared inside. Barbara took her cue and walked over to join her operators and Hawthorne. The man's face was streaked with tears, and the women were openly weeping. Thelma turned and buried her face in Barbara's shoulder. What's going to happen to us now, Barb? She asked as she sobbed. We're going to London, she said. We're going to have a little holiday, and then we're going to go back to work. I want to go home, Thelma said miserably. I want to go back to Atlanta. I want to see Mom and Dad again. You will, honey, Barbara soothed. You will, just not right now. You'll get a chance to relax and unwind for a bit. In London? Thelma looked up at Hawthorne. What about you, Group Captain? Will you be coming with us? Nay, lass, Hawthorne said with a kindly smile. I'll be going up the road to work with Group Captain Mallory, I will. You'll love London, though. It's the best city in the whole of England, it is. Spent some of the best years of me life there. What will we be doing there? Hattie said as she wiped her eyes. Well, dearie, you'll report to Air Commodore Remington for starters, Hawthorne explained. He'll have you lot put up somewhere nice, I would imagine, and you'll talk to some RAF people, medicos properly, who'll help you get over your fright. And then after you've rested a bit, you'll probably have a go with Remington's staff at Station L, doing pretty much what you've been doing here, listening and analyzing Jerry's communications. You're good at that, you know. He took a finger and wiped a tear that was running down Hattie's cheek. It'll be fine, lass. Really it will. Hattie looked at Barbara, who nodded. If you like visiting Swansea on Liberty, she said with a smile, then you'll love London. What about this Remington? Thelma asked. Is he okay? Sir Charles is a dear friend of mine, Hawthorne said earnestly. He's the one we send all of our intercepts to, so he's familiar with your work. He asked for you three personally, so I'm counting on each and every one of you to do your very best for him. All three women immediately stood up a little straighter, and the two junior officers wiped their faces and cleared their throats. That's better, lassies, Hawthorne said. No more tears now. We're at war, and in wars people die, and sometimes those people are very dear to us. That's tough, but that's the way it is. He sighed heavily. Right. Now, do me proud when you get to London. Take your rest, listen to the doctors, and then do a good job for Sir Charles. Yes, sir, they all said together, bobbing their heads. That's me girls, he said, and his face broke into a broad smile. The sound of automobiles approaching made them turn and look back up the road. Two sleek black sedans rounded the bend and presently pulled up to the gate in front of Mallory's Standard. Barbara had never seen their like before. They were long, wide, and rounded with dark, almost black windows. The lead car had an elongated rear passenger compartment, much like a limousine. The back doors on both cars opened and two men in suits emerged. They were both tall, with red hair and ice blue eyes. Group Captain Hawthorne, said the first, extending his hand. I'm Special Agent Alistair McCall, MI5, and this is my associate, Special Agent David Osborne. While he shook Hawthorne's hand, he looked at the Americans. And which one is Lieutenant Barbara Moore? I am, sir, Barbara said, stepping forward. Brilliant, he said. Lieutenant, you will ride with me. Group Captain, you and the two ensigns here will ride with Agent Osborne. We'll debrief you en route. Right. Let's get moving. Without another word, Osborne hustled Hawthorne, Thelma, and Hattie into the second sedan. The driver waited No time in loading their gear into the boot, and then he jumped back in. He immediately put the car into gear and pulled back onto the road where he sped away, leaving Barbara coughing in a cloud of dust. She looked sharply at McCall, who was holding the back door of his sedan open. "What's going on, sir?" she asked with growing distrust. "Why am I being separated from the others?" "Get in, Lieutenant," McCall said pleasantly yet firmly. "You'll find out en route." He slowly climbed into the offered door and found the interior of the sedan richly appointed in 2 rows of leather seats facing each other. There appeared to be some sort of radio and telephone gear built into the panel separating the passenger compartment from the front seat. The interior smelled of leather, pipe tobacco, and fresh coffee. There was another man seated in the rearward-facing seats. He was an older man with thinning white hair and reading spectacles on his nose. He wore officer's khakis with 4 stars on each lapel and aviator's wings above his left breast pocket. There was a long wooden pipe between his teeth, and he was pulling slowly at it. He had a stack of manila folders bordered with various colors of tape on the seat next to him, and he was reading one with a purple border. "Sit down, Lieutenant," he drawled without looking up. Barbara immediately recognized his accent as being from Texas. McCall climbed in and sat next to her as he shut the door. She felt the boot closing behind her, and a moment later the driver, a British Army Sergeant Major, jumped in the front seat. "Let's get underway, Sarge," the man said, and the driver instantly complied. He put the car into gear and expertly turned the wheel in a wide semicircle so that they were headed back inland. Barbara noted that the driver soon had the big sedan running flat out, and the Welsh landscape outside her window was speeding rapidly by. Lieutenant Moore? Lieutenant Moore, this is Admiral James Trimble from your Navy," McCall said somewhat nervously once they were moving. "I believe that he has a few questions for you." "Admiral," Moore said with a nod. Trimble said nothing for a while, but continued to examine the contents of a folder and pull at his pipe. "You still drink coffee, Lieutenant?" he finally asked. "Or have those people over there corrupted you into drinking tea?" When he said tea, it came out of his mouth as tay, and he said it like one would say a swear word. For the first time, Barbara saw him look over his reading spectacles at her and fix her with a glare from his gray-blue eyes. "No, sir," Barbara replied, trying not to smile. "I still drink good, strong Navy brew when I can get it." "Well, you're going to get some," he growled. "McCall, pour the woman a cup. Now, you don't want to take any creamer or any of the faggy shit in it, do you, Lieutenant?" "No, sir," she replied, and she finally allowed herself to smile. "I don't take any faggy shit in my coffee. Just strong and black, if you please, sir." Beside her, McCall had started to reach into a compartment in the paneling between the seats, but he froze when he heard her speak profanity. "That's good, Lieutenant," said the Admiral with a raspy chuckle and an amused grunt. "That's real good. I think I'm going to like you." He reached his hand across the compartment. "Jimmy Trimble," he said, USN and SOB. Barbara took his hand and gave it a good squeeze and shake. "Barbara Ann Moore, USNR and wave," she replied and pointed at the pipe. "That's a mesquite pipe, isn't it, sir? My granddad smoked one just like it." "Did he now?" asked the Admiral with obvious satisfaction. "He must have been from Texas, because that's the only place in the old world where a man can get 'em." "He was from Weatherford, sir. That's a little place—" "I know exactly where it is, young lady. It's 30 miles west of Fort Worth on US 80. What sort of stuff did he smoke in his?" Barbara took a sniff of the smoky air in the car. "I believe it's what you're smoking now, sir," she said. "Perique, isn't it? Granddad told me it came from some place in Louisiana. St. James Parish, I think. And it was his favorite. I remember the slightly fruity aroma. It's strong, but a little sweet. I always loved smelling it when I was a little girl. Smelling it here reminds me of him." The old man's eyes sparkled. "Well, well, well," he said. "I found me a kindred spirit here in the ass end of jolly old England. Well, I declare, who would have thunk it?" "Who would indeed, sir?" Barbara said as she took a steaming mug from McCall, who had busied himself with a vacuum flask while the 2 Americans were visiting. "Thank you, Agent McCall." She took a sip and settled back in her seat. She sunk so deeply into the leather that she felt that she would be swallowed up. "Well, now that we're both here," the Admiral said, "we need to talk about your little encounter last night." He reached in the purple-edged folder and pulled out a series of large photographs which he handed across to her. "Ugh," she said with a shudder when she saw the images on them. There were several shots of a robed creature with multiple eyes and wrinkled skin. They were not of the best quality and appeared to have been taken surreptitiously and hurriedly. "You've seen that feller before?" he asked. "Oh, yes, sir. He called himself the Prophet, and he killed several people at our listening post back there before Group Captain Hawthorne shot him. We thought he was dead, but he was playing possum," Trimble said. "We know all these things can be killed because the Nazis blew one away, blew his brains all over the papy-hanged screwball Schickelgruber, if you can believe it. But I guess Hawthorne didn't hit nothing vital. Now he's on the run and needs to be stopped post-haste. This is some bad business, Lieutenant, and we don't have a lot of time to screw around." "So he wasn't lying when he said he was working with the Nazis," she breathed. "Oh, yeah, these folks and the Nazis are in bed together, all right," Trimble said, ignoring the fact that he'd been interrupted by a junior officer. "I've heard Hawthorne's preliminary report, but I want to hear from you. Start from the beginning and tell me everything you remember, what this thing looked like, what it said, everything." For the next 30 minutes, Barbara consumed 3 cups of coffee and told Trimble and McCall everything she could remember about their encounter with the Prophet. McCall made notes while Trimble listened in silence. Twice he had to refill and relight his pipe, but he did not interrupt her until she told him of the things that the Prophet said as he lay on the roadway before or after being shot. He seemed particularly interested when she spoke of the orb that the creature had extracted from its midsection. "Yeah," he said when she finished her tale. "That ball thing, that orb, it's significant, all right. That little shit Hitler's got a glass jar with 3 of them on his desk right now." "But what are they?" Barbara asked. Is the Prophet really an alien like he said he was? "Well, he ain't exactly from Amarillo, young lady, I can tell you that." He studied some of the papers in his folders silently for a minute or two before looking up at McCall, who had remained silent for the entire trip thus far. "All right," he said. "I got a lot to think about here now. Well, we needed some breakfast, and I need to make a head call. Find us a place on the way where we can eat, son. We got a long way to go, and I'm not doing it on an empty stomach." "Where are we headed, sir?" Barbara asked as McCall leaned forward to talk to the driver. "Cheshire," Trimble answered simply. "It's up north of here. There's somebody there that we both need to talk to, and besides, it's on our way." "On our way to where, sir?" "Scotland." "Scotland, sir? I thought I was headed for R&R in London." Trimble looked at her over his reading glasses and gave a deep, raspy laugh that sounded like rusty hinges rubbing together. "Not anymore, Lieutenant. Until further notice, you're working for me. I've got an invasion to stop, and it looks like I'm going to need your help." Okay, kids, well, that's it for this edition of Stream of Consciousness podcast, and we will be back tomorrow with another edition. We'll talk about some different things, and then we'll right back into the book because we need to get moving along. So, on behalf of everyone here at Starbase One, wish you all a very good day, and please live on.